This is Katie, co-host of Coffee with Keith and Katie. Thanks for listening to the following broadcast on Public House Media.
This is Ryan Pierce, host of Completely Serious here on Public House Media. Thanks for listening to the following broadcast on Public House Media. Once you're done with this episode, I hope you'll come check out my show, Completely Serious, where we talk about sports and have fun with great guests. Don't forget to subscribe on iTunes so you'll never miss an episode of Completely Serious. Thanks again for checking out the following broadcast on Public House Media.
In 2014, Germany shocked the world by putting together one of the most talented and most dominant rosters in soccer history.
Götze! It's Mario Götze!
Argentina, they were so close, yet couldn't put it together when it most mattered. Now you've got an Argentina team that's hungry for revenge.
Messi! And Yeva couldn't stop it!
But what about England?
Pass to Rooney. Sturridge in the middle, there he is! Goal!
Or France?
And Sissoko! They're running riot!
Or Spain?
It's broken for Fabregas. Now it's Iniesta. This is it. That's the goal.
All 32 teams in this tournament are vying for the opportunity to hoist the World Cup trophy.
Still Gervinho. Oh, he's done it.
If you want to be a part of the action at Russia 2018, you're going to need your soccer passport, the World Cup edition. At Public House Media, we are excited to launch a new soccer podcast called Your Soccer Passport World Cup Edition. Come alongside hosts and fans and guests from around the world as we bring you all the action from the 2018 FIFA World Cup. Because who knows, anything can happen in the FIFA World Cup.
What about that? It's John Brooks!
So come on, grab your soccer passport and join us for all the action from Russia 2018.
A sensational volley!
Welcome to the Group C preview here on Your Soccer Passport World Cup Edition. I'm Baxter Colburn. I have the distinct pleasure of being joined on this preview show by Brice Burge and by Marc Serber. Brice, Marc, good evening, gentlemen. How are we doing tonight?
Doing great. So excited. Just 3 more days.
Whew, this is unbelievable. I feel like I feel like the 4 years kind of creeps up on us, right? And all of a sudden it's like, the World Cup's here, and we're like, wait a minute, it's been 4 years already? Like, I mean, I remember what I was doing 4 years ago. It's crazy to all of a sudden think that 4 years has flown by, and now we get to try to crown another world champion in the game of soccer. So it's an exciting time to be alive, to say the least. So, all right, gentlemen, as we get ready, as we always do, we like to take a look at the previews. So for Group C, we have an interesting group. I don't know if you would label a group of death on this run, but you've got a very intriguing matchup here. You've got France, Australia, Peru, and Denmark in Group C. Of course, Los Blues have been the talk of the world. A semifinal prediction is what many of the pundits are saying for Pogba and Griezmann and the many talented players that France boasts. But, Marc, I want to start with you. Obviously, this roster is loaded with talent. Most of it can be found running rampant in the Premier League, of course, and even the La Liga, and even, of course, in Ligue 1 as well, too. But really, where do your expectations of France, and based on what you've seen in qualifying, how do you feel they're going to do so far in this tournament?
I think that they could definitely make the semifinals. You know, when people ask me who are my, first-tier teams to win the World Cup and then second-tier teams to win the World Cup, I actually put them in that second tier. I think they're just a level behind Germany, Brazil, and Spain in terms of having the optimal chance. But they certainly, as you said, have the players, have the talent, and have the creativity as well to go ahead and go through. And if they do make it to the final and end up winning, well, I'd still say they're the second tier, but I wouldn't be completely shocked. I think that obviously, I think they do a much better job of using Pogba than Manchester United does.
Yes.
And I think that the players around him as well have that skill and that ability to get on the end of what he produces. And so this is one of my favorite teams to watch. At the same time, though, to bring up a team that we're not going to get to talk about very much, the USA in that game with them, it was a little worrying. You had a team of younger players, kind of sitting back, having to soak up the pressure, frantic defending. But at the end of the day, France really wasn't able to break them down except for Mbappe's goal. And so that's one thing where, well, how much emphasis do you actually put on these friendlies? But, as pundits, that's the markers we have to go by because we don't know what they were looking to work on specifically in that game. However, I do think that they definitely top this group. But I think it's not going to be as easy as people say for them to just waltz through with 9 points. Even if they get 9 points, I think it could be bruising at times.
And I would agree with that as well, too. And, Mark, you did a great job of kind of leading me into what I was going to kind of ask Brice when I was going to ask you, Brice, how much stock do you put in your worry meter for France based on this young, up-and-coming USA team that kind of rattled the French a little bit? And, yes, as Mark said, they got that draw, but kind of a surprise, I'll be honest, when I checked my phone and saw that Julian Green, first of all, that's a whole nother story, surprised me. Second of all, to see that USA led for a good majority of the match. How worried can you be if you're a France supporter saying, we could struggle to keep up with this young USA team that didn't even make the World Cup? How are we supposed to keep up with the Germanys, the Argentinas, the other big teams when we have to deal with them most likely in knockout play?
Well, I mean, that's a very convoluted response just because, I mean, there's so many little quirks to that play off of each other. I mean, one, I think Mark brought up a great point of like, what are you trying to focus on in these friendlies to prepare you beforehand? I think a lot of that has to deal with their defense. They kind of sat back and let the U.S. attack. Right. Because not only does the U.S. need to have a strong friendly appearance before the World Cup happens because they're not there, but also because France needs to work on their defense, and they know that an energized young team is going to attack. And so when you have all these star players that are coming together on a national team, you can kind of see it sometimes with like a Lithuanian basketball team or the Spanish basketball team or the Russian hockey team, where sometimes the stars can get in each other's ways and not play with each other. And I think that's kind of happening a little bit in the French backfield. You're getting these guys that don't know how to really play off of each other. And France can get ugly when things are not going very well for them. They have so many stars. They have so much talent that they can really respond so quickly, like they did at the end of the game, to get back to make it a draw when they want to focus on that. But just opening themselves up for liability in the backfield was very crucial for them in that friendly. You put all that together, and this is something that I think France needed before they went to the World Cup this year.
There's a really intriguing quote that I'm reading right now that I'd love to get your thoughts on. It's from the French pundit Christophe Dugarry. He said, Pogba and Griezmann are viewed as the strong men of this team. The other players are proud to play alongside these guys. Pogba and Griezmann do not seem to understand that, though. They are both rappers, actors, directors, dancers, footballers, and basketball players at the same time. Griezmann has even said he would prefer to play basketball. A few months before a World Cup, they need to be concentrating. They have to lead that way. They cannot be asking journalists to get behind us and push us higher, or get behind Grisou and take him higher. What is that crap? It's up to them to take us, the nation, there. This French team lacks character and mentality. Whew! Wow! That's some strong words for a team that on paper could, in theory, run with pretty much any team in the world. But, Brice, how do you react to a quote like that?
I think there's two schools of thoughts on that. One is that for a national team, you should always be playing with a certain level of nation first that you see in a lot of countries that are looking towards their national programs as a sign of pride. The other one is, why is this guy telling younger players who could run circles around him to essentially get off his lawn? I mean, this is... like there's a huge age gap, and there's a question about what's going on in terms of why these players are acting the way that they are. And I think that goes into the character of a team, not necessarily as a great, big, huge negative because some old guy wants to complain about these young whippersnappers and their shenanigans, but more along the lines that this is how these players are going to interact with each other. So if you have some more defensive-minded midfielders, are they going to be able to look for the snazzy passes that some of these guys up front will want to see? Will you start to see more of the blue-collar cohesiveness that some of these teams are bringing to the World Cup when they're a little bit lower down, or are you looking to rely purely on the star power once you get higher up? And those kind of characteristic values are starting to pop up in the French team. It creates a little bit of division or cohesiveness depending on who you want to talk to, and a lot of that seems to be more on off the field issues than on the field. And that ultimately is going to play itself out, which is, it kind of does already. When France is on, they're an amazing team. When they're off, it gets ugly. And that's going to be, those kind of character differences is one of the reasons why they lack the consistency, and they're kind of all over the map right now.
Can I interject on this?
Please.
I think, first of all, Brice did an excellent job explaining it and describing it.
Yeah.
You have to look at a couple of facets about this. First of all, Christophe Dugarry is a curmudgeon. He likes to get in there and mix it up, and he's said, taken a lot of shots at players in the past. So this is something that he's well known for doing. Mm-hmm. Secondly, at the same time, he's not the first person to say this about Paul Pogba. A former Premier League player it's eluding me at the moment who exactly it was, but somewhere along the line of a Gary Neville or somebody there, had just said, a few weeks ago that I think it was actually Frank Lampard said, Pogba plays really stupidly. He's always trying these fancy flicks and trying to be too creative, and is worried about that image and being flashy more than he is about making the right plays and the right passes. And I think at times that's actually a fair criticism of him.
I agree.
At the same time, and I'm not trying to be a Pogba apologist, but the bottom line is I could watch this guy pass all day.
Yes.
He's one of those players that I think does have that kind of creative flair, and it does, come at him sometimes. And I think, you take a look at a lot of talented players and players on different levels, like a Paul Gascoigne or a Diego Maradona, and you kind of have these kind of troubled talents. And obviously, he hasn't done the nutter things that they've done off the pitch, but, he's still kind of an enigma in that sense. And so I think it's, from a coaching staff perspective, from a team perspective, how do you deal with that? How do you want to handle that? Do you want to, accept his quirks and find the best way to make him fit in? Or are you going to try and meld him into the, traditional player that everybody wants him to be, which I think with those kind of players is certainly really tough. Exactly like you said, Brice, it's all about how France responds. You take a look at Italy, and it seems like anytime Italy is under a scandal, or it seems like it's the world against them, they go on and win the tournament. Whether you look at Rossi coming off of the suspension for match fixing in '82, or Calciopoli and then them winning the World Cup in 2006. So I think, for France, it's going to be a similar kind of situation. How do you respond to the criticism and the pressure that you've been put under heading into this tournament?
Well, realistically, too, you look at France as we wrap up our discussion on France. The last 3 World Cups, this stat is fascinating to me. They are 3, 4, and 5 in group stage play, and 2 of those 3 victories came in the 2014 World Cup. That's some staggering information right there. And they haven't exactly had a bunch of slumps on their teams the last couple of years. There's been guys like Thierry Henry and many others that we know from years past. Frank Ribéry, among others. Zidane, of course, would have been in 3 World Cups ago as well, too. And they still have struggled in group play. France, they're going to win the group, but that's an interesting stat, in my opinion, especially with the fact that it appears that who France is building their core on is more interested about how many Instagram followers they're going to get as opposed to how many goals and great passes they're going to establish and win games. So that could ultimately, France could ultimately end up beating themselves, not by the fact that they've been outclassed by a team, but ultimately because they just maybe don't care. So I'm curious to watch France and feel like they could potentially fall victim. And anytime you play this next team, Australia, I feel like you never know what you're going to get. The last highlight that we hear in our theme song before we get into the episodes is the announcer's call of Tim Cahill's volley against the Netherlands in the last World Cup. One of the most sensational goals I've ever seen. Mark, you and I were talking off air. That's kind of one of the calls you live to make as a broadcaster as well, too. But Australia is always just a fun team to watch. They're never in a position, in my professional opinion, to win the World Cup. It's just never going to fall in the cards for Australia. But they're a fun team to watch. They possess some players that you can potentially expect something out of. This is going to be Tim Cahill's last go-around, but you look at the roster, only one player plays in the Premier League, and you can't really expect a team that has little to no top-level experience to actually be a contender, in my professional opinion. Mark, where do you fall on this Australian team?
Oh, I'm really excited to not only watch Tim Cahill. I think it was Sports Illustrated described him as Benjamin Button, and I think that's hilarious but true. I mean, he just seems to always be producing no matter how old he gets. And so I think, it's going to be the same as we've said going into the last few tournaments. As Tim Cahill goes, Australia will go. You talked about the only player in the Premier League, and Aaron Moy was so important to Huddersfield's talent survival, and his playmaking ability, I think, is going to be a huge part of how well this team does. But you take a look at Denmark and their strength, and not only their ability to play as a team, but also the likes of Christian Eriksen and how are they going to deal with him. And then Peru, who just seems to be like on a magical carpet ride. And I see this being a very tough group for Australia.
Yes, I would agree with that as well, too. I feel like Australia's going to find a way to grab a draw, but I don't feel like they're going to win any of their 3 group games, unfortunately. Bryce, do you find a way for the Aussies to pull some Tim Cahill button magic at all?
Well, I think they will, and I think they will in every one of their games. I just don't think that just pure magic is enough to get them a draw in any of them.
Right.
And that's a little sad because Australia has the toughest team responsibility, I think, of any squad in the World Cup this year, because this is kind of like, it is debatable about whether this is the group of death or not, because one really good team's not going to make it out for sure. But when you look at the 4th team that's not there in talent, is a team that has been proven multiple times. They had to win 2 playoff games just to get to the World Cup. They're going to be battle tested. They're going to be ready to go, and they're going to make sure that every single other squad in this group is going to have to play straight and honest. And that's something that you couldn't say in other groups in the past where you always had like a throwaway team. Mm-hmm. And Australia's got the talent and the drive to do that. And it is going to be interesting to see, because as we've talked about France, if France has an ugly day, if you're talking about a team that can go out there, it's going to be one that's got, magic and discipline that would be able to upset or surprise a team like France. And so what will Australia be able to do in that kind of scenario? I don't think it's enough to really do anything, but I think it's enough to really kind of wear down these teams. I think it puts the 2 teams that get out of this group in a worse position because they can't take a game off, and that it's going to really kind of grind on them even more, which is going to make these teams that move on a little bit more dogged as they try to go on to the knockout rounds.
All right, Mark, ultimately, can we agree that Australia just though is going to have a hard time kind of getting out of this group? I feel like with the magic, as you mentioned, from Peru and even the talent Denmark possesses as well, too, it's going to be an early exit, unfortunately, for the Socceroos.
Yeah, but I think Bryce hit the nail right on the head. Is they're going to be in every single game that they play. And it's not going to be a walkover, and you're going to have to be at your best to grind it out against them. But I do think that at the end, when it comes down to the individual one-on-one battles and that kind of talent, that's where they lose out.
Yep, I would agree with that as well, too. You want to talk about another team that has defense and might be just fully immersed in this World Cup fever. It is Peru, especially with the recent re-inclusion of their captain, Guerrero. He was pardoned by a Swiss court. I have my opinions about that. I think that's a little ridiculous personally. And gentlemen, feel free to correct my thought process on that. But if you are under speculation, this thought of a player having these doping issues, whether he meant it or not, the fact that he kind of tried to bend and break and go around the system, in my opinion, is speaks about his character. And I think I understand he wants to play in the biggest tournament of his life, but at the same time, I feel like you have to do your time for the crime that you committed. And I feel like that was a miss, unfortunately, by the courts that pardoned him. But feel free to knock me off my soapbox here, gentlemen, and let me know your thoughts about that situation.
Well, I guess my first question is what makes you more upset about it? The fact that the cocaine appeared in his system through the tee, or are you upset about the appeal process through the Swiss court?
I think it's more so the appeal process. Obviously, anytime a player is getting any sort of illegal substance in his system, regardless if it's meant to or not, I think that I always find it hard when players are like, oh, I had no idea. When things like cocaine and other things are showing up in your system, it's kind of hard to not. I feel like even the three of us as common folk in a sense would know and or understand that something was not right in our system, and all of a sudden it would show up. If we showed up to our jobs with cocaine in our system, regardless if it was on purpose or not, we're probably not going to have a job the next day, So it's the fact that I think it more so stems from the fact that professional athletes, I feel like, are kind of given this back door at times to get through situations because, well, it wouldn't be the same if XYZ weren't on the team. And, this means something for the team and for the country. Yeah, but they're still human and they still should be put up, in the circumstances to serve their time, because that sends a bad message, in my opinion, to younger players and especially the kids looking up to those players as well.
Well, I mean, Mark, if you want to jump in on this, I mean, the way that I look at it is that you're a South American country, you're going to have cocaine plants around. Right. I mean, it's just something that happens. I know that, just for me personally at my job, we have very strict drug policies, but we also have some wild plants that can give false positives or would contain some of the same style of byproducts that pop up on drug tests. And so, I mean, there's a cultural aspect there, there's a geographic aspect there, and I think more importantly is that with the three other captains of the teams in this group saying let him play, I think that there was enough of an international outrage about the rules in place that it wasn't just one group lobbying compared to people saying that the system was wrong in this case and that it should be changed because of the system, not because of the action. And I think that's kind of like the chicken or egg thing about this whole scenario is like, are you worried about the system or are you worried about the act? Because depending on which one you think is more egregious depends on whether or not you're going to allow him to play. And I think that's kind of what shined through is that with the court system, they said that the way that it was done, that it was proven through a tea leaf and not just snorted, then it was going to be a different kind of scenario. And at least in this case, he gets to play, even though that there will be a punishment one way further along.
Right, absolutely.
You guys are about to get a window into the way that my mind dysfunctions, but it reminds me of Seinfeld, where Elaine Bennis is unable to go to Papua New Guinea because she keeps testing positive for heroin when it turns out to be poppy seeds from a poppy muffin.
Yep.
And so for me, it's kind of the exact same thing. And Brice, you alluded to this is, there's rules and there's a system. But at the end of the day, the guy wasn't doing lines of cocaine. He's not taking PEDs. It's Cocal that, got in through a plant that, he's drinking tea. At the end of the day, he's doing nothing wrong. He's drinking tea. And I think that as you said, the other three captains saying, let him play shows that, hey, he wasn't doing anything wrong. And if that's the case, then I think he has every reason to go ahead and play because it was just the tea leaf. It wasn't him going out and really abusing the rules.
Yep, and I would agree with that as well, too. And obviously we don't need to get too deep into this because obviously Peru does have a 36-year drought that they are in the process of getting the opportunity to write the history books maybe a little bit differently as well, too. But in theory, the way Peru is set up, I feel like the possibilities of wins against an Australia and even maybe a Denmark are potentially in the cards for this team, in all honesty, gentlemen?
I think so, very much. As much as Peru's kind of getting a knock, I think Peru's kind of your Cinderella of the World Cup this year. When you look at how strong that they can be and how many times they've had to fight just their own ignorance over the last 3 years, last 4 years to really kind of start coming together cohesively. And now between winning the playoff to get into the World Cup, getting that last spot, to now having this legal battle where you've got another fight that deals with things off the pitch, you're coming together with this Peruvian national team that is kind of reminding itself of some of the great sports legacies that we see in international sports, whether it's Miracle on Ice or the Chilean national team in the 80s. Just so many great opportunities there, both politically and personally, and with the actual game on the pitch, that I think that this team is going to really come together and surprise some people and move out of this group.
All right, gentlemen.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that this team, you go and you look at the roster, and not only the names that we know, but some of the lesser known names to people who might not follow the game as much. And, maybe these guys don't play on your Portos, your Benficas, or your Ajaxes, or, your Manchester Uniteds, but the majority of their guys play on teams in top leagues around the world, whether it be Mexico, whether it be Portugal, Brazil, Holland, Jefferson Farfan, Paulo Guerrero, with Lokomotiv Moscow and Flamengo, respectively. They've had times in the top leagues. I'm really excited, especially to watch these two in a World Cup. And then you throw in a guy who, not on the other across the pond, but on this North and South America, is really well known in Raul Rui Diaz. And you have a really exciting forward line backed up by a lot of players capable of producing some magic. And they've been really fun to watch, not only throughout qualifying, but in the friendlies coming into this World Cup as well. I don't think they only beat Australia, but I think it comes down to their match with Denmark.
And I agree with that as well, too. I feel like in certain groups there is that pivotal match between two teams where you feel like you can kind of go either way, and that Peru-Denmark game, I think, is going to be the match to watch in this group play. So exciting stuff, to say the least. But let's get on to the Danes, because we want to finish up our preview here with Denmark and see just kind of what this team has. Mark, you had talked earlier in the preview show here as we're talking about Group C about Christian Eriksen. Of course, his reputation precedes him, an exceptionally talented young player that continues to make waves no matter where he goes. Denmark, for me, is an interesting team, I feel like, because they have the capabilities of being a competitor. I don't feel, obviously, as we know, they don't have the firepower to run over the big teams, but they can be that thorn in your side that you're like, gosh, I just have, it's like when you have it's going to sound silly, but like when you have that little rash or that mosquito that just won't go away, you're like, just leave me alone, but it will keep sticking around. And I feel like that's what Denmark can be if they play their best football at this World Cup.
Absolutely. Denmark is a team that is very well drilled. They're very organized. They'll be strong, they'll be quick, they'll be fast. For me, it's just that lack of creativity. You have Christian Eriksen, who's on a level all himself. Then you look at the rest of the squad and you kind of wonder, okay, well, who can you put him up with that top tier player? And I think, you obviously have the likes of Thomas Delaney and Lasse Schoen and those guys, but you just don't get that feeling that there are other players who can match Eriksen for the way he thinks, the way he moves, the way he creates. And maybe they'll feed off him, but you just don't feel that they really have the creativity where in an absolute 0-0 battle, they're going to be the team to find a way to make a breakthrough when everything else is deadlocked.
Right, and this was a team, too, that had to see the departure of Nicolas Benter as well, too, due to his groin injury with club play leading up to the World Cup. So you talk about another possible striking option, obviously not available. But as you mentioned, though, still some creativity, still some intriguing players on this team. Brice, how do you look at the Danish 23-man roster?
I think it's strong and stable. The biggest problem with it, though, is that it is lacking the star quality once you get past Eriksen, and the relying on the long ball The long passes, yes. the quick strikes to him get more and more apparent as their games go on. And it's frustrating because, as we talked about it, there's a pivotal game of Peru and Denmark right off the bat. And I think more importantly is that that's the first game in the group for both of those teams, is that they play each other. And there's never been another team that I can think of that needs to score in the first 10 minutes of a World Cup game quite like Denmark does, just to feel comfortable to allow themselves to move along, especially as Peru brings back in Guerrero and starts to integrate him more into the system again. They're going to be kind of shaky in that first 25 minutes, first half, and he's only going to get better with adjustments throughout the game. Well, Denmark kind of deludes itself further along as the game goes with the long ball. So it's going to be interesting to see how that first matchup comes along. And it really is a make or break scenario in the first 10 minutes, 15 minutes for Denmark for their entire World Cup.
Mark, just an interesting stat to throw in is that of their forward line, only one player has 8 goals and nobody else on the forward line has more than 4 internationally. So that's, kind of something I look at as, are these guys producing at the top level? And that's a bit of a worry for me.
I agree. And Mark, I was going to ask you too, how much how much pressure rather do you put on the goalkeeper, Kasper Schmeichel, as well too? The Leicester City man, we know what he's capable of doing. And arguably, when you are lacking in certain areas, if you have a solid goalkeeper, Schmeichel might be able to bury them out of, might be able to keep them out of getting buried at times against the run and gun of Peru or the many talented players that come at them from France as well too. But is Kasper Schmeichel in the post a reassurance or a concern for you in your mind if you're Denmark?
Oh, I think he's a huge reassurance. And I think what makes it even better is, we talk about all these talented teams like France and some of the other teams like Belgium, who we're going to preview on another show. And the bottom line is those teams are so top heavy in terms of their talent, in terms of their top level and what they bring. And Denmark's the exact opposite. I think they're heavy, they're talent heavy from Kasper Schmeichel through the back until you reach Christian Eriksen, but then that's where it starts to wane off. So I don't think that defense is gonna be a huge problem for them. I think the problem comes at the other end.
Yep, I would agree with that. Any final thoughts, Brice, on Denmark as we get ready to wrap up this show?
No, I think that, talking in the goalie spot, talking about who's up front, there's no question about what the Danes plan on bringing to the World Cup. It's a pretty straightforward scenario and one of the easier teams to read, I think, in this tournament.
I would agree. All right, so Brice, your prediction, what 2 teams get out of the group in your mind for Group C?
I'm going to go with France 1, Peru 2.
Okay, Mark, your thoughts?
It's bad radio, but I agree.
I see you guys are inside my head. I had that thought in my head as well too. So I'd love to say that Australia shocks the world, but no, Peru deserves it. They deserve this opportunity to get out of the group and to have some fun. So why not? We need that Cinderella story every year, and why not it be Peru? All right, gentlemen, thank you so much for being a part of this Group C preview. It's always a pleasure. I know we've got so many more previews coming up in the next couple of days as well. And we are going to be having both of you join again for an upcoming show as well. So until next time, gentlemen, thank you, Brice and Mark, for stepping in tonight. I appreciate it.
No problem.
Thank you.
All right, and thank you, the listener, for joining us. Remember, you can subscribe on Apple Podcasts and wherever you find your favorite soccer podcasts. We're on Stitcher, Google Play, and anywhere else, Radio Public. The list goes on and on. Remember, the World Cup still just a few short days away. Lots of great content coming out from Your Soccer Passport World Cup Edition. Special thanks to Public House Media. You can find them at their website, thephmedia.com. Learn more information about their shows and about Your Soccer Passport as well, too. I'm Baxter Colburn saying thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time on another edition of Your Soccer Passport World Cup Edition.